So much happening in the life of our church. 14 of us returned this week from a trip to Oradea, Romania, where our church partners with Impact Church there. And I've been on a number of these trips, whether you call them partnership trips or mission trips. And I think Shauna and I would both say, arguably, this is our favorite trip we've been on. And I don't think we say that about every single trip. But just the team that went, the things we're able to do there, the depth of the partnership that exists. This time we were able to do a couple of our guys from Epic, Ben Lee and Trey Stevens. They spoke at a Oradea Tech Hub event, so 100 people, standing room only, came to that. People from that came to the Leadership Summit the next night at the church who said they had never been to church in their lives. And so you never know what God will use based on who we are, where we live, what our church is known for. So we're doing that. It was an amazing trip. You should consider going on one of our partnership trips with us. We're headed to Vietnam later this year. Sure, we'll go back to Romania next year, Uganda next year. So that's incredible. Another big thing going on in our church this week is that tomorrow morning, 13 of our Epic kids and 4 adult chaperones go off to kids camp. So be praying for those chaperones, especially as they head off. To do that with our kids, but that's incredible. And then you heard, if you're in the room, you heard about the online campus, but for those of you watching the podcast this week, we just want you to know you no longer have to wait till Sunday night or Monday. You will be able to track with us from anywhere in the world at 9, 10:30, and 12 o'clock Pacific time in the U.S. And so know that we have podcast listeners all around the world, which is super exciting, and you're going to be able to keep up with that. If you're part of the Epic community, just know that when you're out for business or whatever the case may be, you'll be able to log on. And I got a sneak peek of what it's going to look like this week, and you are in for a treat. I'm just like, wow. I feel like I can't even claim any credit for that at all because I have no clue. But Todd, Jackie, the rest of the team, they're getting ready to make it a really high-end, exceptional thing that I think you all will be proud to just show off to your friends, especially those who aren't yet comfortable coming into a church because that's a foreign concept. It's a great virtual first step into our church community, and we're praying that God will use it in all kinds of ways for our global community, for those who've left our church. I know some of your moms and dads listen to the podcast weekly, but they will be able to see it live, and then introducing our friends, our neighbors to say, hey, you can stay in your home. You get a picture of what it's like, and then who knows what God will do. Sometimes we think about all the negative that comes with things like technology, and yet we have this opportunity that previous generations have never had to leverage technology in a way that it can reach the globe in real time. So we're real excited about that. Today we are finishing up the Wise Up series, and we started the series May 21st, just saying that we're on a quest to gain wisdom. We want to be the kinds of people, and we want to be the kind of church that gains God's wisdom and then applies that wisdom. We said that wisdom and knowledge aren't exactly the same. In fact, the big difference is that wisdom is applied knowledge. It's one thing to know something. It's another thing to apply it as a skill in every area of our lives. And as we close out the series today, here's how I want you to think about the big topic for today. I want you to think about your life as a series of tables. So sometimes we think categorically about our lives, but I want you just to imagine that every arena of your life occurs at a table. And so you have a family table. You have a work table. That could be, if you're at a small organization, that could be the entire organization team. If you're at a big or medium-sized company, it could be just your specific team. But think about that, whatever work looks like for you, who's at that table. Every one of us has a neighborhood table. We have a table of acquaintances, right? In this day and time with social media, we have a lot of acquaintances. We have a table that's our friends table. And I hope that every single one of us in here has a table of people who we are influencing and pouring into. And so rather than just thinking of categories, I literally want you to think, like, I've got this table and I've got that table, and my life is just a series of tables. And while these tables are vitally important, I want to talk to you about a table that I think is most crucial for my life and your life. It's likely, however, a table that most of us have never even considered. And here's the question I want to ask to get us thinking about this crucial table. Here's the question. Who gets to sit at your wisdom table? This is where we're diving into the rest of the 30 minutes or 40 minutes, 50, whatever we have left here. Who gets to sit at your wisdom table. And the reason why I think this might be the most crucial one is that whoever sits at your wisdom table is going to have a direct effect on what happens in your relationship and at that table, what happens when it comes to your work, what happens when it comes to your use of time and money, how you interact, whether or not you live out your faith and the way that God created you to live it out is going to be directly affected and impacted by who is or who isn't sitting at your wisdom table. And here's how I really want us to think about it. I want you to think about your wisdom table as being the table that holds or that houses your personal board of directors. Or maybe the advisory team overseeing your life. It's incredible when you have a company or some nonprofit, it's true even for our church, that there's going to be a board or some version of a board put in place so that a board can make sure that there's accountability, so that a board can make sure that we're seizing opportunities that are for our church or for your business or whatever, the nonprofit that you might be a part of. And so what a board does is it leads a company and it allows the leaders within that company to get wisdom and to understand how they need to capitalize opportunities. And it's amazing to me how strategic we can be when it comes to the board of our business, or even for me when it comes to putting together the board of our church, and yet we don't give a thought to who's on the board of my life. Who's the advisory team leading the way? Who's keeping me accountable? Who's speaking into this? Who's saying, have you considered this or have you considered that? And the reason it's so crucial is that whoever gets a seat at your wisdom table for your life, it is going to affect every area of your life, so much so that if you put the wrong people at that table, it might destroy your life. It literally could destroy your life. The book of Proverbs has been our primary guide in this series, and the same will be true today. So if you have a Bible, Proverbs chapter 13, verse 20. If you need a Bible, you want to follow along, just raise your hand, and our team will get one of these into your hands. It's yours to keep. One verse to start off with. We will be in Proverbs and several other places. I think they're all between chapters 11 and 15 if you just want to have a place either digitally held or you actually have a hard copy of the Bible this morning. And as we get into this, I want you just to be thinking constantly, who is sitting at my wisdom table? Who gets a seat at my wisdom table? And the reason it's huge is this. You and I do not get to determine who sits at our family table, do we? I mean, let's be honest. If we did, some disinvites happening, right? But you don't get to control that. And most of us, unless you run your own business, most of us don't get to have the final say-so in who sits at our coworker table. If you did, there would be some people not sitting there, correct? And unless you're one of these mega wealthy people who buys all of the houses around the house that they just bought, you don't get much choice in who sits at your neighborhood table, right? So you don't have control over any of those. But friends, you have absolute control over who gets to sit and who doesn't get to sit at your wisdom table. So stand with me. Let's launch this talk with one verse that I think will be foundational. Then keep Proverbs open because we'll go there, and then we'll wrap the message up by looking at an Old Testament story where an individual had to decide who got to sit at his wisdom table, and when he made the wrong choice, it turned an entire nation away from God's good for their lives. It's that crucial what we're talking about today. So Proverbs 13:20 says this, "Walk with the wise and become wise. For a companion," what does it say, Ben? "For a companion of fools suffers harm." Walk with the wise and become wise, for a companion of fools suffers harm. Or to use the second half, identical to how the first half was written, walk with the foolish and become foolish. You can have a seat. In this entire series, we've been saying that the life of wisdom or a life of foolishness, it doesn't happen randomly. It doesn't happen in isolation. It's not just that I so happened in one moment to choose wisely and in another moment to choose foolishly. We've been saying that a life of wisdom happens along a path. And you've heard me kind of have fun with this, like the path, the path, the path. It's all about the path. It's all about the path. And here, Solomon's saying, walk with the wise and become wise. He's saying, walk the path of your life with other wise people, and guess what? You become like them. But if you walk the path of your life with foolish people, you will also become like them. Based on who's sitting at your wisdom table, who are you likely to become? Who are you likely to become based on who's sitting at your wisdom table? One of the most disheartening things for me is to see who people allow to sit at their table. Like people who get relationship advice from an individual who has sabotaged every relationship they've ever been in, I'm like, that's not good. Even people who get spiritual growth advice from someone who talks a big faith game but doesn't live it out, I just want to say they are not who you think they are. Doesn't matter how much Bible they know. And then when you see people receiving financial advice from those who are foolish with their money, I'm like, oh, please don't. One of the most disheartening things, because here's the problem. If you have an idea that's foolish, and you have foolish people sitting at your wisdom table, then you will walk away, and they will walk away from that table thinking it must be right because we all agree. And you will be making the most foolish decisions you could possibly make with your life. It really matters that much. Here's the thing. I can and should have many kinds of people in my life. So should you. You can and should have many people of different types in your life. You should have non-Christians in your life. You should have people who are just starting a faith journey with Jesus in your life. You and I should have people who have ended up in terrible situations for various reasons. We should have those kinds of people in our lives. I'm not asking you today, who should you have in your life? I'm simply asking you this question: should they get a seat at the table of wisdom? So if you think about this, super practical, but lots of different kinds of people in my life. I have a table of people I'm influencing, but those people that I'm trying to influence and pour into, they're probably not going to have a seat at my wisdom table. And if we can go a little bit stronger than that, you know how if in the world we live in out here in terms of so many things that are starting up business-wise, you know when a venture capitalist gives X amount of money to a startup, perhaps it ensures with that funding that a person from the company gets a spot on the board of directors. And that makes a lot of sense to me. Some of us, for our personal lives, we are giving automatic spots on our personal board of directors to people who probably shouldn't be there. Just because someone is part of your family of origin doesn't mean they should be sitting at your wisdom table. I'll say it again before your mom texts you. Just because they are called mom or dad or brother or sister, it doesn't mean they should get a seat at your wisdom table, right? Now, you can't change the fact that they're at the family table. But friends, the family table and the wisdom table are not interchangeable. The people who are at your work table, they could be incredible at the job, but if you put them over here on your wisdom table, you will be the fool. Who gets the seat at your table? Who gets a seat at your table? And you may think, Ben, I want to avoid having fools at my wisdom table, so I'm just going to figure this out by myself. I'm not giving a seat away to anyone. I've got this. Proverbs 12:15 tells you, think twice. The way of fools seems right to them, but the wise listen to advice. The way of fools seems right to them, but the wise listen to advice. There are things in my life that I can't see. These are called blind spots. And you're like, Ben, what's wrong with you? We all have them. We all have them. Because we live, obviously, inside of our lives, we can't see what everyone from the outside. Have you ever seen into someone else's life something they couldn't see? It would be foolish for you to go, oh, I don't have any of those. You do, and I do. We need people who can see what we can't see. Now, the text says in Proverbs 12:15, the way of fools seems right to them, but the wise listen to advice. Here's how you can think about that. Here's what a foolish person does. Seems right to me, let's go with it. A wise person says, this seems right to me, but I'm going to bring in 2 or 3 men and women into this process with me and say, hey, I trust you. How do you see this? Who gets a seat at your table? And if you say, Ben, no one gets a seat at my table, then you are limiting yourself, and you're probably guaranteeing yourself that you will be on the path of foolishness. God, called the church into being because you don't have it within yourself to provide all the wisdom you need for your life. That's why I said you need the hand, and you need the foot, and you need the heart, right? You need all of this, and we need each other, and we need to be wise about who gets a seat at our wisdom table. Proverbs 15:22 says, plans fail for lack of counsel, but with many advisors they succeed. Plans fail for lack of counsel. Who's giving you counsel when it comes to your plans? Do you have people that you're asking? And do you have the right kind of people you're asking? Hey, I think God's leading me in this direction. Here's what I'm considering. What do you think about this? Do you have anybody like that? And if you have someone like that, is it the right kind of someone who needs to be seated at your wisdom table? And this isn't just like, oh, if I have the wrong people at my table, it's going to be bad for my life. It's going to be bad for everyone that you relate to. If you lead a company, it's going to be bad for the company. If you're leading a family, it's going to be bad for the family. Whatever it is that you're doing, if you get fools sitting around your wisdom table, your advice table, and your personal board of directors, it's going to be bad for a lot of people. Proverbs 11:4 says, "For lack of guidance, a nation falls, but victory is won through many advisors." Now, historically, and in our modern day reality of our country and around the world, we know that this is true, do we not? For lack of guidance, a nation falls. You see, sometimes we think that those who are leading companies and even leading nations as kings and queens and presidents, we think, oh, because they're a leader, they must be wise. Case in point? True? No. There's no correlation necessarily between a leader of something and wisdom. Now, I do think over time that every person will show the fruit of their life, which will show you they were actually wise or they were actually foolish. But you don't necessarily get to a point because you're wise or foolish. You might be great at flattering people. You might be great when it comes to public speaking. You might be great at building a team to believe that you're the next thing, right? I mean, it could be a lot of things, but there's no correlation between leadership and wisdom necessarily, especially in the early days of that. Eventually, you're going to be shown up or shown out. Eventually, you're going to be. So it says, victory is won through many advisors. Who are you letting speak into your life? And here's something really important to note. When it comes to who is sitting at your wisdom table, there likely is not going to be anyone ever to sit at that table that can give you wisdom in every area you need. So if you think about when a business puts a board together, when a church puts a board together, you want certain kinds of people, right? You want a finance person, you want a legal person, you want whatever. So when it comes to who has a seat at your wisdom table, some people you need to not only know who should sit there, but you need to know what topics they are confined by. There are people that I love getting organizational leadership advice from, but I would never ask them about their marriage because they're not married or they have a terrible one. Does that make sense? So when it comes to, Shauna and I getting parenting advice, it doesn't make sense for us to seek wisdom from people who aren't parents or whose kids are younger than ours. We need to go to other people like the McCord family, other people that have raised kids and say to them, hey, we are trying to go through these middle school years. What do we need to know? Does that make sense? So when you think about who are in the slots at my table, who are in those seats, no one's going to have all wisdom for every question you have other than God. So ask yourself, what do they bring to the table? And let me relegate asking their wisdom on particular things that have to do with their area of expertise or just an area that they are wise in. I think that's really, really important. As Christians, we are to love everyone. Agreed? But because we're supposed to love everyone, we think we should allow anyone and everyone to sit at our wisdom table. So as Christians, we are to love everyone, but we aren't supposed to take advice from everyone. We are to love everyone, but we aren't supposed to take advice from everyone. And we aren't supposed to take advice just because someone is a Christian. It really matters who is at your table and who isn't at your table. Like really, I'm going to show you before we wrap up our time, in case you're doubting, is this a topic worthy of one of the 50 Sundays of a year we're meeting together at Epic Church? I'm going to show you that what happens with this issue is going to directly affect your contribution to the world. It's going to directly affect whether or not you walk with God during your days on earth or whether you walk against or away from God during your time on earth. It is everything. Whoever's at your table is going to determine your path. And whatever path you're on is going to determine if you do what God created you to do or if you do the opposite of the thing God created you to do with your life. It really matters who's at your table and who isn't at your table. And here's why. If you have all fools at your table and you share an idea with all of those fools sitting at your wisdom table, you know what they're going to do, right? They're going to agree with you. They're going to be like, yep, sounds good to me. Let's do it today. Brilliant plan, Ben. And you all walk away from that table thinking that you're geniuses, right? Why? Because we're in 100% agreement. But the reality is, no, you're all fools. You're all fools. Like, we got together and thought this would be a great idea. Yeah, but if you're all foolish and you agree, that doesn't make you geniuses. That just makes you more foolish. It matters who's at your table and who isn't. Let me help you determine how to get the right people at your wisdom table. This isn't an exhaustive list, but I think 3 criteria I'm going to give you, I think really these things will really be helpful when you think about who gets to sit here. And I really want you to think about, even if you need to ask people walking out of here this afternoon sometime, like ask people, hey, could we talk every couple of weeks? Because I need wisdom, and I know you can bring this wisdom. Here are 3 ways to determine. Number 1, you want someone that sees God as the ultimate source of all wisdom. They see God as the ultimate source of all wisdom. Here's why that's important. If this man or woman is going to be a source of wisdom for you, you need to ask yourself, who or what is their source of wisdom? And if it's a self-help book, you can learn things from there, but that's probably not the best ultimate source of wisdom. So this person, whoever you invite to sit at your table, one of the criteria is simply this: they see God as the source of all wisdom. That's what the scriptures reveal, and they believe that, and they start with that as their starting point. So they become a source of wisdom for me and for you only if God is the ultimate source of wisdom for them. Number 2, you can clearly see the fruit of their wisdom. They do more than talk a good game. They do more than give you theory, or what I like to say, they are just idea men or idea women. You ever been around an idea person? They have a million ideas for what you should do with your life, but they're not implementing any of them. You ever been around that? There needs to be some fruit. Like, you can actually see the outcome and the results. If you take their financial advice, there should be a reason because you see the fruit of their wisdom. If you take their career advice, there should be fruit from their wisdom. If you take their parenting advice, there should be some fruit of their parental wisdom. Does that make sense? And so when I'm thinking about who's going to get a seat at this table, they've shown themselves to be wise by the fruit of their wisdom. Number 3, they are willing to tell you the truth in love. They're willing to tell you the truth in love. We do not need, you hear this all the time in the corporate world, we do not need yes men or yes women sitting on our personal board of directors. We do not need people that pat us on the back 100% of the time, even if we walk off a cliff. You don't need that. You need people that say, Ben, have you thought about that? Or Ben, I see this. I don't know if it's an issue, but it seems like it could be an issue. If you haven't had anyone in your life in a long time say something to you that questions a decision you make, not out of being harsh, but out of being loving, if you haven't had that in a long time, you probably don't have the right kinds of strong people on the personal board of directors for your life. Is there anyone who can ask you? Is there anyone who can say to you in love, both of these parts are huge. If it's just truth with no love, they don't get a seat at my table. If they want to tell me what's right but not what's best for me, no way. But if they just give me love and they're like, Ben, you're amazing, just keep doing whatever you're doing, like, I don't need those people there either. I need people who will sit there and go, have you thought about why did you choose this? What is your habit here? I need those kind of people. And you need those kind of people as well. One of the greatest reasons to be deeply connected to a church community like Epic is what we're talking about today. The more deeply you get connected to this church, it doesn't give a raise to Lindsay, who's over community, okay? That is not our metrics. But what it does for you, the deeper you get connected in a place like Epic, the more it widens the pool of candidates to serve on your board. Now, I don't want you to come to church just for networking. But the more you get connected, like when you go to a small group, all of a sudden there are now more people than you knew before. Now, remember, just because they're in that small group, it doesn't mean that they are. Thank you. Because we've all been in that small group, right? And let's just be honest, in some ways, all small groups are like, there's going to be one or two. You're like, and some of you are thinking, I always end up in no, the small groups, they're amazing. There are going to be wise people there, but just because they're in the group doesn't mean that they are wise. And just because I'm going off, I need to stop. Just because they're in that small group or in our church doesn't mean that they're dating material either, okay? But that's a separate series. I just want to say, but Ben, there at Epic, I'll never forget when God changed my life in college, I determined that I was going to date the first Christian I met, and that was a terrible idea. I don't know when I discovered that, probably when we were watching Psycho for the second or third time. And only Brad knows this individual, which is awesome. Brad, our worship pastor, and I, we went to college together, and so we have a lot of foolish things we've done in the past. But we're in our 40s now. We're doing well. We're better. It really matters who's at your table. And one of the greatest reasons to be connected in a community like Epic is because it widens or it broadens or it deepens the pool of candidates who potentially can serve at your wisdom table. It does that. See, here's the thing. If we are seeking to orient our entire lives around Jesus, we should make sure those sitting at our wisdom table are seeking to do the same. Does that make sense? Like our vision statement is that we want to see an increasing number of people in San Francisco orient their entire lives around Jesus. If that's what you want your life to be about, then it would be crazy for you to have people at your wisdom table overseeing your life and advising you who don't have that common goal. But I see this so often. But so-and-so thinks, or I read in a book, are they after what you're after? If they're not, why would you take wisdom from them? One of the greatest roles that I think our staff team plays and our leaders play here at Epic is that we take very seriously the idea that one of our unique roles is to help get the right people around your wisdom table. And so this is part of my job that I take very, very serious, so that when I hear that you need to know about a particular kind of thing, I have always a mental Rolodex of people that are really good at that thing. But it's disheartening when two different things occur. Sometimes when there are wise people in that you have access to and you choose to get advice from the fool. And number two, what is terrible is when we get advice from people and we don't take the advice that we get. Now, I want to end by showing you a story. If you have a Bible, 1 Kings chapter 12, it will be on the screen. I want to show you a story where someone had to decide who would get a seat at his wisdom table. And initially, it seems like he makes a wise move, and then I think he makes the most foolish move possible, and everything is affected by the move that he makes. So in 1 Kings chapter 12, what you have is a guy named Rehoboam who's coming into being the king. Now, we learned in week 1 with Solomon that Solomon was the third king of Israel. So the way it all began, Israel asked for a king. God actually gave them a king. So they had Saul as their first king. Second king was a guy named David. The third king was Solomon. But Solomon dies, and his son Rehoboam is going to take over the kingdom. And I want you to see what he does. It's all about a wisdom table, and then I'll share with you what it led to. Rehoboam went to Shechem, for all Israel had gone there to make him king, so that crowning moment. When Jeroboam, son of Nebat, heard this, he was still in Egypt, where he had fled from King Solomon. He returned from Egypt. So they sent for Jeroboam, and he and the whole assembly of Israel went to Rehoboam, and they said this to him. Your father, right, Solomon, put a heavy yoke on us, but now lighten the harsh labor and the heavy yoke he put on us, and we will serve you. Rehoboam answered, go away for 3 days and then come back to me. So the people went away. Then King Rehoboam consulted the elders who had served his father Solomon during his lifetime. He's getting people around his table. How would you advise me to answer these people, he asked. They replied, if today you will be a servant to these people and serve them and give them a favorable answer, they will always be your servants. But Rehoboam rejected the advice the elders gave him and consulted the young men who had grown up with him and were serving him. He asked them, what is your advice? How should we answer these people who say to me, lighten the yoke your father put on us? The young men who had grown up with him, his childhood friends, keep that in mind, replied, these people have said to you, your father put a heavy yoke on us, but make our yoke lighter. Now tell them, I don't know why this is a put down, but anyway, if you've ever used this, awesome. My little finger is thicker than my father's waist. I don't know. My father laid on you a heavy yoke. I will make it even heavier. My father scourged you with whips. I will scourge you with scorpions. Dramatic moment here in Israel's history. He realizes, like his father did a generation before him. If you remember from week 1, the reason Solomon becomes the wisest person to ever live is because it's the one thing that he asked God for. And Rehoboam, his son, he makes a wise initial move. He says, I don't know how to be king. These people are asking me to lighten their load. I'm going to take 3 days and get away, get some advice, and figure out what I'm going to do. And so the first group of people, he says essentially, using our lingo for today, he's like, hey, come pull up a seat at my wisdom table, those of you who serve with my father. These were experienced politically. They were experienced when it came to military operations. They had seen what Solomon had done well, and they had seen and been privy to what Solomon had not done well. And he does a great, wise move. He says, come have a seat. He says, the people are asking me to lighten their load. What do you think I should do? And those wise older men say to him, you should give in to their request. If you do this, they will be with you forever. If you do this, they will serve you. They will be faithful to you. They will be loyal to you. If you would just do this. Then the text says what? But he rejected their advice. Which, before we go any further, I just had this thought last night and this morning. Are there people that we disinvited from our wisdom table, not because they were foolish, because actually they were wise, but because they told us something we didn't want to hear? Who's giving you relationship advice that you ignored and you said, get up from my table because you were so hell-bent on going for that person? And I just wonder if there's some phone calls or emails or letters we need to write this week and say, hey, I know I put you out of my life because I didn't like what you had to say, but you were right. I was the fool. You were the wise. So now the seats around his wisdom table are empty, and he's like, hey, childhood buddies, I don't know why this would be a bad idea. Why don't you come have a seat at my wisdom table? So he invites these young people, these ambitious people, these simple people, these evil people, these foolish people. And they're like, no, we're going to show them. We're going to show them that your father was nothing compared to you. We're going to show them. You're like, Ben, are you sure that this has catastrophic impact on the rest of my life if I choose this wrong? One verse, 2 Chronicles chapter 12, verse 1. Here's what happened after this decision. It says, after Rehoboam's position as king was established, after he decided who would sit at his wisdom table, and he had become strong, he and all Israel with him abandoned the law of the Lord. Now, there are lots of reasons for this, but I think it all flows from one decision he made. You're like, Ben, it's not that important. It is everything. Who gets to sit here? Because whoever sits there for me is what my life is going to look like in the end, and yours too. He has this moment where he's got wisdom around him, and they would have walked with God, and they would have lightened the burdens on the people, and they would have seen God cause them to flourish. Instead, he says, you guys are disinvited. I want these guys to sit here. And it says, because of that one decision, he and all of Israel abandoned the law of the Lord. Do you think it matters who sits there and who doesn't? Let me ask you a question. Who are the people you need to disinvite from the table? Now, you don't have to tell them this, by the way. I advise you not unless you have to, especially if it's your mom. Just tell her she's still got a great spot at the family table. She can even sit at the head. Who needs to be disinvited from your wisdom table? Who needs to be invited to your wisdom table? You see, we think about spiritual decisions as being like these amazing moments and so emotional, and they can be, and God's speaking audibly almost to us, and that certainly can be. But for some of us today, the most spiritual decision we can make is to decide who gets to sit there and who doesn't get to sit there anymore. But we started this series by saying that God is the source of all wisdom. And so for one moment before we conclude this series, I think we have to hit on who's getting the head seat at the table. We're a community, if you don't know our vision, it's to orient our entire lives around Jesus for a couple of reasons, a lot of reasons actually. But sometimes we think it's just because he's God, and that would be enough. He's the Lord of the universe. Scriptures are real clear about that. He has all authority. He's God. We should follow him. He should get the head seat. But he also should get the head seat at my wisdom table. It's because he has all wisdom that isn't available to me and isn't even available to everybody that sits at my table. He has all wisdom. So it isn't just that he's God, I should follow him. It's that he's God. He created me for himself. He knows how the universe and I am supposed to work, and it would be wise for me to jump on board with his plan. So let me ask you, who's sitting at the head seat at your wisdom table? Is it an empty seat? You're just sort of going with the flow, going through the motions. Is there another human being there? If Jesus isn't there, the most likely scenario is that you're the one sitting at the head. And I wonder today, if you've never turned your life over to trust Jesus with your life, your future, your eternity, if today you might just say, Jesus, I want to invite you to this head seat at the table over my life. You are worth following, and I'll give up whatever it takes to follow your ways. You are all wise, you are all good, and you are God, and I am not going to live for me anymore. I want to live for you. If that's you, you can let us know on your card that you want to, need to make that decision today. I don't think there will be a regret from that. But then for all the rest of us, myself included, who doesn't deserve, and I don't mean because they're not good enough, it's just that they're not wise enough, they no longer deserve a seat at this table. Who needs to be disinvited? Can you visualize who's there right now or who has been there in your life? Can you visualize that? For some of you, maybe there's a media outlet and they really are feeding all the advice that you take in your life. That's dangerous. Maybe it's a self-help book and that's like... But then real people, like who is there? And it doesn't matter if they're in this community. It doesn't matter if they're the pastor of Epic Church. Are they wise? Because whoever is there is holding up a mirror to your face showing you this is what you are going to become. Knowing that, what needs to change? Who needs to have a seat? Who needs to get up from their seat? Would you pray with me? God, thank you for being the source of all wisdom. Thank you for the promise you give us in James 1:5 that if any of us lacks wisdom, we can ask God who gives generously to all without finding fault. Thank you for this series, what we've learned about the path. And God, I know for every one of us in here, even if we need to make some changes, we can all say thank you for those men and women who have sat at this table in really good ways in our lives, have spared us from heartache, have helped us walk the path you had for us. God, I think about the people who come to my mind. I think about my father. I think about individuals in this church and other churches. Think about mentors. God, thank you for who's been sitting there in our lives, who needed to be there. God, I also recognize that there are some individuals who don't need to be there or don't need to be there anymore. God, what if our future trajectory is based on who sits at this table? God, you know every story in this room. You know who needs to get up from the table. You know who needs to come sit at the table. God, I pray that this would be like a revolution for our church. We want to be wise, filled with faith, but also filled with wisdom. Help us, as the Proverbs say, as iron sharpens iron, help us to sharpen each other. God, so many of us perhaps have a seat at other people's tables, our kids, of course, others in this church, others in our community. May you be our source of wisdom, even as we become a source of wisdom for others. In Jesus' name, amen. I want to ask you to stand. I hope that today has been impactful. I know just this idea of the wisdom table is a new concept for me, but I think it's so crucial. When I think about my kids and who's speaking greatest into their life, I think about their wisdom table. When I think about you guys and I see the beautiful decisions you're making and the heartbreaking decisions you're making, I'm thinking you've got wrong people or perhaps the right people at your wisdom table. Most spiritual thing maybe you can do today is to disinvite some folks or make sure you do invite some others. This will mean everything for the future. Yours, your family, our church, even a broader community than that. Lead us.